Welcome to the ISO Show, dispelling myths and sharing tips for success to improve your business with ISO standards, with your host, Mel Blackmore.
Hello and welcome to the ISO Show. So today's show is going to be talking about ESOS, the Energy Saving Opportunity Scheme. Now we covered this in episodes 11 and 12 briefly just to explain what it was. But this episode I'm going to be talking with Rachel Churchman, who's had first-hand experience of helping businesses to be ESOS compliant. And it's going to be more of a kind of a practical, hands-on kind of what to expect really when it comes to ESOS audits and what you need to do as a manager to be compliant for ESOS. So welcome back, Rachel.
Thanks, Mel. Good to be back.
Great. Yeah, thanks very much for joining us. So let's begin with looking at these energy audits. What's the purpose of doing energy audits?
Okay, so as you've previously discussed, ESOS is a legal requirement, and one of the routes to compliance is to conduct ESOS energy audits. So the purpose of an energy audit is to understand how a business, a premises, a site if you like, is actually consuming energy. And what we're looking for is to try and identify opportunities for improvement, so where companies can actually make often quite small changes to improve their energy performance and at the end of the day save money. So it's definitely a worthwhile route to compliance.
Okay, great. What kind of things should a business come to expect then for doing one of these energy audits?
Well, as it sounds, it's a practical audit, the energy audit. It involves a qualified auditor coming to the site and assessing everything that's happening on that site that is consuming power and energy. So that can be everything from the buildings themselves, fabric of the building, how old they are, how insulated they are, perhaps the processes and the activities that are happening within that premises. So that could be everything from sort of office type activities through to, high energy manufacturing processes, whatever is happening on the site. And we'll also look at transport fuel if it's related to that site and the processes at that site as well. So we're looking to understand what happens on a day-to-day basis to be able to identify those opportunities for improvement. But it means that we do have to go and stick our noses in absolutely everywhere on the site. So we will be literally from the minute we walk in the front door, we're going to be looking at light bulbs, we're going to be looking at window insulation, blinds, air conditioning, heating. We're going to be looking at plant, so that could be boilers, it could be compressors, whatever plant and equipment is being used on that site. It's everything really, and even through to how people are using the space, because quite often you'll get some people who maybe feel the cold and will be sitting with a little heater underneath their desk and they'll be sitting opposite someone who feels warm and has got the window open and got the fan on. So we're also looking at the sort of organisational culture in the site to try and identify where energy might be wasted as well.
Okay, great. And how long would an audit typically take? So if we look at, I guess you could say just an office or a factory. I mean, how long do these audits generally take?
It can depend on size and scope. So a general office with people working on a PC or a laptop or hot desking, we're pretty much looking at heating, ventilation, air conditioning, and we're looking at what's plugged in, so electricity use, so monitors, IT equipment, server room equipment, that kind of stuff. For a factory, we'd be looking more at the plant that's being used within a factory environment, so that can be quite a lot more complicated. There might be motors, compressors, all sorts of equipment involved. So the less complicated it is, the quicker it is. Office environments, we are pretty much counting light bulbs and equipment. Manufacturing, there's a lot more to see and there's a lot more components to see. So that's going to take a lot longer. A normal office of a sort of average size, we could probably audit that in maybe just over a morning, maybe 4 or 5 hours. If you're in a multi-storey building, maybe you've got 3 or 4 floors, then you're looking at a couple of hours per floor potentially. Manufacturing, you're looking at least a day, if not 2 per site, depending on how
much equipment they've got.
Exactly.
Yes, yeah. Okay, that's great. And so what are the sorts of things that you think are really important to try and capture then as you're walking around? I know that you say you try and capture everything, but is there anything within those environments that generally use more energy than others that you're looking specifically at getting more information on?
An opportunity for improvement that nearly always arises relates to lighting. Although this phase, because we are in phase 2, a lot of companies have actually made improvements on their lighting since phase 1, which is great to see actually. It means that, the reports from phase 1 have worked. But lighting is a big energy user, and especially if you're not using the energy efficient lighting. If you've still got sodium lights or fluorescent tubes in use, it's quite significant how much energy that can use. We're pretty much looking at everything that's plugged in, so all of your IT equipment. IT server rooms are very energy intense environments because they are using obviously lots of IT equipment that's pulling a lot of power, to include UPS batteries, and they've nearly always got air conditioning running 24/7 in there as well because of the heat that's being generated and potentially wasted by the equipment. So that's always an area that we'd want to go and have a look at. Boilers, we're going to be looking at what temperatures the heating's set at to see whether perhaps that could be lowered as well.
Right, so if an organisation outsources certain things to do with energy, it could be a data centre, so the servers aren't actually stored in the office anymore, they're in a data centre. What's the remit there?
That's out of scope. So it's basically everything that we see on site at that point in time. So if it's not physically plugged in that building that we're visiting, it's not consuming energy at that site. So, yeah.
Okay, great. So say, for example, if you're in a serviced office, so you don't own that office, is that all still taken into consideration as well?
If you are drawing energy, so if your computer is plugged in and you're using it, then that is in scope.
Okay, great. So let's say I'm a manager within an organisation and it's the first I've heard of ESOS. So I wasn't here 4 years ago when the company had to comply with it. That person has gone. Or it may be that I'm a new manager in a company and for the first time that company is now eligible for ESOS. What sort of things should I be responsible for? What should I be doing? Should I be informing the workforce? What would you say kind of the first steps as a manager taking on that responsibility for ESOS?
I think you're correct. The first thing you should be doing is communicating to the workforce that the energy audit is happening and the purpose of that energy audit. From first-hand experience, you can see it can make staff uncomfortable if someone is walking around with a clipboard and making a note of every piece of equipment that's being used in an office.
Yeah, because it could be seen as they're doing an asset register because they're looking at selling the business.
Yeah, exactly. Also, we've had some people saying, are you doing a sort of a time motion type study? So it's first thing is put your staff at ease and let them know what's going on and what to expect, and the fact that we literally are just counting equipment and looking at what you're using. Also, by communicating with staff, it means that if we do ask any questions around how equipment is used, how often things are switched on for, they're receptive to why we're asking those questions, and more readily they're going to give us the answers that we need.
Yeah, and hopefully some recommendations for improvement as well, where they think that there's waste within the organisation.
The other thing you can do as a manager, whether it's yourself or whether it involves you talking to your facilities management team, is trying to collate as much information as you can about the equipment and plant that you do have on site. And that includes things like your planned preventive maintenance, your PPM records, so that we can understand how well equipment's being serviced, maintained, because obviously that affects energy efficiency. It also helps us then identify the equipment that we're seeing. So if we've got an asset list of what's actually being used on site, that can really, really help the auditor find those improvements for you.
Okay, cool. And in your experience as a Subsea low carbon consultant and lead ESOS assessor, have you got any other additional things that businesses should be considering that might help them on that journey to compliance for ESOS?
Really, it is from the energy audit perspective itself. What can really help the auditor prior to and during the auditor is just pulling together the information that we need in order to provide that valuable report. At the end of the day, our report is going to save you money. If you undertake our recommendations, the whole point is that it reduces energy use. So things that can really help to provide the auditor are things like a site plan, so that we can understand the domain you're working within and we can make sure we plan our audit effectively so that we don't miss anything that could be an opportunity. If you've got information about the building and its construction, again, that can really help. It's good to understand how much control and monitoring and measuring you have over the energy you're using. So details of any sub-metering is a good thing, very useful to have. We need to understand sort of the local controls, whether there's any BMS in place to help control heating and ventilation and air conditioning. Whether there's any work patterns, so we need to have that background as to how the premises is used, whether there's shift work, whether there's seasonal work, whether there's fluctuations different months.
Yeah, which can all have an impact, can't it? So that's obviously why it's done over a 12-month period, so you can bring any of those variances into the equation.
Absolutely. Yeah. Obviously, we've mentioned the list of equipment on site. That's really, really useful. From a people perspective, understanding what policies you've got in place in terms of energy management. So it might be you do have formal policies in place that either are being complied to or perhaps aren't being complied to. So it's good to have an understanding of those.
Well, you mentioned about a list of equipment, so an asset register, would that be helpful for you?
It would be useful, yeah. IT is always another great resource because when it comes to PCs, laptops, IT equipment, they've got a really good idea of what they've got on site. And also things like leased photocopiers, how many of those have you got on site?
And also they'll have access to any remote workers as well, so what equipment they might have that's not necessarily on site, do you still need to take that into consideration then, do you? Like use of laptops by remote workers?
To be fair, the audit is a spot check, if you like, so we can only assess what we see on site at the time of the audit. So if there's any hot desking areas, we will audit what we can see on the day, but from a background point of view, we might ask, well, how often is this typically used? Approximately how many people do you get using your hot desking?
Yeah.
So we get a bit of a feel for it.
Okay. Well, thanks very much for sharing that with us, Rachel. I think that helped to capture some of the practical elements of applying ESOS. We've covered off some of the more technical aspects of it and what needs to be done by when. Great, so obviously we know that time's running out now, beginning of July, so we've only got a few months left to go. So I guess the next stage is for organisations to double check that they do need to register for ESOS if they haven't done so already, absolutely, and get cracking with it. And of course, at Blackmores we've got consultants like Rachel that can help with doing ESOS energy audits and reports and signing off and that sort of thing. So obviously we'd be more than happy to help. So I look forward to catching you on the next episode of the ISO show.